really do my
Let's
best.
talk more about this.
Oh, we're streaming. We're now live on Facebook. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, and I'm absolutely, completely thrilled to have Rick Moody here. This is his book. I'm sorry I can't get my mirror function working. It's now in paperback. It's so tremendous. Actually, the interesting thing is I actually reviewed this book for San Francisco Chronicle before I even knew Rick. And in the San Francisco Chronicle, I called Rick's book funny, haunting, brilliant. I said Moody turns his formidable attention to 2014, his first extraordinary year of his second marriage, and how their love made surviving the absolute disasters that befell them not just bearable, but deeply resonant. This is a book about calamity, about the messiness of love and life. And the surprises in it is that this particular memoir is actually spiritual and transcendent. It just makes for an impossibly great book. So here's some more praise and bio about Rick. Rick's first novel, Garden State, was the winner of 1991 Editor's Choice Award from the Pushcart Press. The Ice Storm was published in 20 countries, and it's just a knockout film. It's one of the first movies where the movie is almost as good as the book. It also won Best Screenplay at the Cannes Film Festival. Rick has won the Addison Metcalf Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship. He's been published in Spain, France, Brazil, Germany, Holland, Portugal, Italy, the United Kingdom, and more. He's the winner of the Penn Martha Alburn Prize for Excellence. And wait, there's more. Rick's album, Rick Moody and One Ring Zero, was released in 2004. And he plays and writes lyrics, and he's released 2 more albums, the latest, which is called Spirit Duplicator. And wait, there's more. Rick is also a life coach, which I find completely fascinating. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Rick. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to talk to you again.
Well, it's such a pleasure. If you're tuning in, you probably don't know that Caroline and I did this once before, and
Yes.
And we.
Oh no, you froze.
And so I want to say how much I love Caroline's new book, With or Without You, which I've been reading, and I really hope we can talk about that because I have many questions. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you. So let's talk about first. Both of our books have a lot to do with transcendence in midlife and how things change. I find that I had so many tragedies and wildness in my early life, and I know you did too, especially after the coma that produced this book. But to my amazement, it's actually made me happier that I went through these things, because I feel like you learn different things from going through the things. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. You and I were talking about your coma on email, and I had a sort of related experience, which is in my 20s, I had really bad depression, and I landed in the psych ward in my 20s for a stretch. And I too came out of it really strongly feeling like it was a seminal and important moment in my life. You know, it was horrible. It was 28 days of horror, but at the same time, the things I learned there really helped. And the memoir for me is about a much later period of sort of settling down and realizing the importance of relationships, which is so central in your book. I really identified with this, kind of fuck up musician guy in your book, who Simon, right? That's his name, who sort of comes through who does every bad thing and kind of, wakes up in middle age and begins to see the light. And I really identified with that. And I feel like, you tell me, but I assume that the book that you set out to write about the coma experience, and you do an amazing job about that, but as in your work generally, the characters are all fully developed. So even the villain guy who's not fully, becomes a total person that you can sympathize with.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, because when I was first showing early pages of my book to other writers, they were saying things like, I mean, Simon starts out and he's in his 40s, but he's still acting like he's 20, and he's kind of jerking around and doing drugs and all this kind of stuff, and he wants the fame. And people kept saying, boy, he's really a jerk, isn't he? Or they would say like, oh, I want to slap him. And I kept saying, well, wait a minute. Once you understand him and why he's doing what he's doing, you won't feel that way. I promise. And I had to go back and do a whole lot of rewriting, because I think that why midlife is so great is that's the time when you do realize, oh my God, this is what's important, and all the rest. And why did I waste all that time, being crazy or having these nutso relationships and all this other stuff? And I really got invested in his change and in his realization that, you don't need all this stuff. I mean, I also wanted to talk to you about fame, because you said something, I don't remember where you said it, but it really struck me, where you said, all of that stuff doesn't matter. What matters is sort of the work and this and that. And I think that's true too, but I didn't think that was true when I was in my 20s. And I came to realize in midlife that yearning for fame isn't really for fame as much. At least for me, it's a yearning for, you want people to see you. It's like just saying, here I am, I want you to know you, I want to see you. And there are much healthier ways of getting that than depending on strangers. Can you talk about that?
It's funny, I have this day in my life that I think back on when I'm really chewing on this topic. and 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 it was a day where my friend and a writer I really admire, Mary Morris, invited me
Oh, I
to
know Mary.
Sarah
Yeah.
Lawrence. So she invited me to Sarah Lawrence, and it was right when the Ice Storm movie was really popular. And I guess she was doing one of those adaptation panels or something. And I went out there, and to my eternal shame, that was a period where I sort of bought the hype a little bit about myself and about the movie. And so, without wanting to use disagreeable language on Facebook, I was a bit of a DICK during the question and answer. And I think someone said, like, what's it like being adapted? And I said, I'm really bored of that question. I'm getting this.
Oh my God, you didn't. Oh, that's terrible.
And
Oh.
I'm actually being nicer than I was. I was working on it a little bit.
Oh no.
And when I think back on that time, I have horrible twinges of guilt about that day. And I think I've apologized to Mary, but Mary, if you're out there, I apologize to you again. And middle age and the difficulties of middle age really eradicated that feeling, and like the slings and arrows, many of which are cataloged in The Long Accomplishment, the slings and arrows of time,
Right.
really remediate one's self-obsession.
Right.
It just can't survive.
That's exactly true. That's exactly true. It's just, I'm really glad that I went through all the stuff I went through, because my career has been so bizarre, where I literally had 8 failed. Well, my first novel was a success and I was flavor of the month. And then I had like 8 failed novels, failed in the sense that, yeah, they were published and they were published by major publishers, and maybe they each sold like 50 copies. I made no money. Nobody knew who I was. And my 9th novel was rejected on contract by my publisher then as not being special enough. And I remember saying, well, what if I rewrite it and make it more special? And they said, we don't think you can. And I said, well, would you look at anything else? And again, there was this silence. And they said, we don't think you can. So I went through a period of a month or so where I had to get used to the idea that, okay, I'm not going to be a writer. It's over for me. I had that one blip of fame at the beginning years and years ago, and now it's over and that's it. And then Algonquin picked me up, and that was for Pictures of You, and they turned it into a New York Times bestseller and all this stuff. And the interesting thing is people kept asking me, isn't that amazing? Don't you feel great? And I kept thinking, well, I don't know how I feel about it. I sort of feel like, well, it's really nice, of course, and I'm really happy and I'm really thrilled. But on the other hand, it makes me feel like fame doesn't mean what I thought it meant. And I don't think it is what anybody thinks it means, unless you're a total idiot and you just sort of like all the accolades. And recently I was talking to Elizabeth Stroud from Mighty Blaze, and her whole thing is that she said she didn't even pay attention that much when she got the Pulitzer, because she just wanted to get the words on the page. And to me, thinking about that, I'd much rather be working and getting the words on the page than thinking about sales figures. To me, the only reason to think about sales figure is to make sure I can pay my bills and that I have enough traction so I can write another book.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I don't even, actually, the truth, this is unrelated because I want to ask you about coma, but the truth is I've never checked a sales figure.
Oh, I love
Never
that.
one.
That I don't look at my royalty statements either. I don't want to
Yeah,
know.
I don't either. If there's a
wanna know.
check, I tear it off, but I never look at the number. And like you, I've been publishing for almost 30 years, I've never
I'm
checked.
so glad. I'm so glad to hear that. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. It's just, if money comes in, that's great. If it doesn't, then fine. So what do you want to know about brain function and coma?
So, so you said in your email that they gave you a sort of a memory pill so that you can't remember your coma. Is that
Yeah,
true?
I never heard of that before. I have never heard of it. Apparently there's a drug that is a memory blocker. And they use it for two reasons. One, so that you don't remember painful procedures. So if they have to do it again, you won't like tense up. And two, because it makes you easier to manage. So they gave me these memory blockers. So when I came out of the coma, I had no idea. I didn't remember anything, but my body remembered everything. And I was panicking all the time. I would smell a certain scent of antiseptic or medication or whatever, and I would have a panic attack. I would see a kind of stripe, which was like a kind of stripe on a blanket they gave me, and I would have a panic attack. And I kept thinking, what's happening here? And the doctor said, well, we gave you memory blockers because we thought it would be better. And then they would say in the same breath, and nobody thought you would survive. And I said, well, if you thought I wouldn't survive, why did you give me memory blockers? Why couldn't I at least have had that memory? Like, who knows what would have happened? And there was a lot of, the doctors didn't tell me a lot of stuff. And I think because they really didn't know what was wrong with me, and they were trying all these different stuff. So I kept waiting and waiting for the memories to come back, and they never did. And nobody who had been through this with me, like my husband, my friends, nobody wanted to talk about it because they were all traumatized, or they would, I tried to get my mom to talk to me, and she started crying and looked 1,000 years old. And I said, okay, fine. You don't have to do that. So it was the idea of a friend of mine who was a shrink who said, in hypnosis, if you put a match on someone's face, they'll blister. So the brain doesn't know the difference. So why don't you just write a book about it? So I wrote my first coma book, which was about a person just like me, who didn't remember anything, and I didn't feel any better. And I kept having these symptoms. And 5 years ago, I thought, this is ridiculous. I can't be, I'm just really afraid to go to sleep because it seems too much like coma to me. And there was one week where Jeff had to go to Norway on business as a journalist, and I didn't sleep at all. I kept the lights on in the whole house, and I stayed up every night until 7 when it was light, watching movies and seeing who else was there on Facebook, and then I would sleep when it was light. So I went back to my friend who was a shrink and said, what should I do? And he said, well, why don't you write about someone who's totally different than you are, and so you'll go through that experience and it will be different. And I found that there was this incredible sense of wonder in doing it, because I had somebody who did remember everything and not in a terrible way, and someone who emerged differently and not in a terrible way. And I have a friend, Joseph Clark, who's a neurologist. He does research in it at the University of Cincinnati. And we would have long conversation. And he's the one who told me that when you're in a coma, your brain can refire and rewire, and you actually can create totally different memories and a totally different personality. And that's partly why there are cases of people who do wake up and all of a sudden they're fluent in Mandarin. Or one guy woke up and he had never played a note in his life, and suddenly he was a virtuoso on the violin and playing concert halls. And I had such a sense of awe and wonder about that, that I thought, oh, this is going to be really, really fun to write. And the more I researched it, the more I found that, oh, this isn't like the first coma book, which was sort of dark and serious. This is more, at least for me, a sense of absolute wonder about, wow, we don't really know what goes on in the brain. And Joseph had told me, because I said, well, what can I have her do and what can't she do? And he kept telling me, anything is possible. We don't know, so you just make it up and you do whatever you want, and I'm sure it's going to be possible. And I ran everything by him, and everything he said, yeah, it could happen. It could happen. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing. And that's, what I wanted to write about, because I think that, there's a kind of transcendence now in midlife where I feel like all of the terrible things that you go through, including, the coma itself, I don't remember, so it wasn't terrible. Coming out of the coma was pretty awful. I was in the hospital for a few months after that, but I still look back at it and I kind of wonder, because I think, oh, I got through that. There were all these doctors always coming in saying, well, we don't know if you're going to live. And I would say, yes, I can. And the nurses would come in and they would watch soap operas with me, or whatever else. And I thought, that's an amazing experience. I'm really glad I had that. I think if given the choice, if someone said, would you do that again? It's like what we were talking about, as horrible as it is, what you gain is so much more. And so the answer would be, yeah, I think I would. I think I would. I mean, I was ready to. What I had was actually caused from my pregnancy. And afterwards, I told my doctors, well, I'm going to get pregnant again. And they said, no, you are not. You will have this same thing again happen to you. So I couldn't. But I kept thinking that I wanted to anyway, because this way I would be better versed in what to expect. And they kept telling me, no, you don't know. You really can't know.
I guess we should say for people out there, without giving away too much of the book, that there's a passage written from the point of view of someone who's in a coma.
Yes.
which is what I found so exciting. And so, it's like when one reads one's peers, one's novel writing peers, one always hopes for like one of those really meaty passages that's a novel intelligence saying like, I'm going to make a great scene out of this. and that was my experience. Like, yes, she's going to write into the coma, and I was really excited by it. And so I was sort of wondering if that was the generative piece of the book.
Yeah, it's sort of, okay. Yeah.
It has the incredible opening chapter, which is a real tour de force too. But the coma chapter is, really causes the book to sort of jump up a level. Was the coma the thing that got you started, or did that amazing opening chapter with the pill taking start you?
They both sort of did. And, interestingly enough, my editor wanted me to cut the in the coma scenes. And that was the one thing I wouldn't budge on. I said, no, they have to be there. They just have to be there. And I couldn't explain why. I just knew they had to be there. I knew that the book was going to start with an argument. I knew it was going to be in New York, and I knew it was going to be that impossibly blizzardy blizzard. And then it was just sort of, once Stella went in the coma, I was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with her? And then I decided I wanted to see what it was like for her in the coma. And a lot of those passages came from when they wake you up from a coma, it takes, or at least for me, it took a week to do it because they had to lower the memory blockers, and then they have to lower the morphine, which is really high doses. So a lot of what she was thinking about were things that I had experienced. I mean, when I woke up, everything was in black and white. And I remember thinking, okay, and it's so real. It's as real as anything. You never for 1 minute think, it's not like when you're on acid. It's totally different. It's like real. You can feel it, you can touch it, you can smell it. Everything was black and white. And I thought, this is really strange. Where am I? And I had this idea that I was in a high rise and that I had gone into a parallel world. And I kept thinking, I have to get out of this. And I don't know how, but I have to. And when people came in the room, there would be colors floating. All of a sudden I would see colors and it would be floating behind them. Sounds did indeed have music, any kind of weirdness you could imagine was there. And I couldn't talk to anybody because I was intubated. So a lot of the conversations I had were with myself in my head saying, okay, this is happening. And where is this person? And where is that person? And it's like you get little bits of information and you try to make sense of them and you can't. And I never forgot that sort of feeling. And it just sort of got less and less and less and less until when I was finally off the memory blockers and finally off the morphine. Again, it was like a TV show because there I was laying there and there was a ring of doctors around me and they're all leaning forward saying, do you know who you are? Do you know what day it is? And I remember I was sort of wanted to laugh. And then for some reason I wanted to lift up the covers and I lifted up the covers and I didn't realize that they had done like these 5 emergency operations on me. And they were like just stitches all over me and drains and stuff. And I remember just carefully putting the covers back saying, this probably isn't real, even though it was. And it was like being in another life for a while. And that kind of feeling I still have. I mean, I just still sort of have. I feel like somebody took a layer of life and ripped it away from me. And now I know things, and some of them I wish I didn't know, but for the most part, I'm glad that I do. And that was Stella in her coma, just sort of like latching on to things and saying, well, also in that same sense of wonder that I hoped I conveyed in her, where you think, okay, this is leading to this, and this is leading to that, and wait, there's a sound of a voice. What is happening now? And just that constant refrain of, I'm right here. Why aren't you interacting with me? I'm here, when nobody does, or they do in ways you don't know. It was strange. It was strange and wonderful, which I know is a very weird thing to say about a coma, but for me it was.
I mean, what you're describing, the way I'm hearing it is a sort of amplification of what consciousness is. Like the issue
Yes.
with coma is that coma is a semi-conscious state, by which we mean a state that has moments of consciousness or a kind of consciousness that's different from what we think consciousness is in daily life.
Yes, that's exactly right. What we think it is totally different. That's why I was so interested in how Stella changes from a very practical nurse who's like very concerned about what's going to happen in the future, and I have to know, and we have to make plans right now, to when she comes out of the coma where she feels that, well, we can't know. I'm just going to sort of be in this moment and be glad about stuff. And I very much feel that I don't want this to sound woo-woo in any way, but I feel like science is so much more interesting than people give it credit for, and that the world and the universe is so much more interesting. And I sort of feel like, who knows, maybe there is a parallel world out there. And in that parallel world, maybe I'm still in a coma, and maybe I can access it. I mean, I truly believe that things are possible that we can't imagine. And to me, that's much more interesting than, any other sort of belief, because our consciousness can do extraordinary things. I mean, I definitely feel like Stella, I feel like my personality has changed, that I'm a very different person than I was in my 20s, when I was both extraordinarily painfully shy to the point where I couldn't talk to people, and I was also wild as hell. I mean, just like pushing all the boundaries, and if it was dangerous, I was going to do it. Whereas now I feel like, well, I don't know who that person was, but I understand why she did what she did. But I feel like my whole brain is different. I mean, you must feel that way. You've had a very wild youth.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that I did all of it. Like any, person with addiction or mental illness would likely say, I'm glad I did it because, it helped make me who I am, and it created in me a desire for responsibility that I had never had.
That's interesting. How did it create a desire for responsibility?
Well, it's like the Mary Morris story. Like there's so many events in life where I look back and I have so much pain associated with them, things that I did and remarks that I made. And I'm, in all truth, I didn't, I never robbed a bank or hurt anyone physically or anything. So most of the things that I feel horrible about are because I'm enlightened enough now to realize
Right.
how sort of, you know, um, arrogant youth is a thing to be lamented. I'm wise enough to be able to do that. But when I think back on them now, I just really powerfully don't want to be the guy who would do those things again.
Yeah, it's interesting to read about, though.
Yeah,
to
I mean,
like
that's what
look.
memoir writing's all about, right? That's why when
Yeah. I really love that. That's really a funny thing. What did the person say, by the way, when you said you were really bored with that question? Did they sort of sink into themselves in shame
yeah, there
that they
was
had
like
asked?
like the air kind of went out of the room in Knoxville, but it's so irritating. I just wouldn't do it now. And I try to make up for it, when anyone wants to talk about the Ice Storm movie now, I'll talk about it all day, if people want to. So that's I'm trying to make amends over some of my
Right.
excess.
I wanted to ask you, because both of our books are about things that happened to us in the past, and now much time has passed. When you look at, oh, I want to hold it up again. Okay. So when you look at this book again, about 1 year in your marriage, years and years ago, do you feel, if you were writing this book now, how would it be different? I mean, do you think about things differently about it now than you did then?
Well, the thing that's different is I think pandemic
Oh, right.
awareness is so different. Like, would anyone sit down now to write a book about a year in marriage, when we have
Oh, right.
the excesses of the presidency and we have the
Right.
kind of, really intense, um, uh, grind of being home in this way that we are in the pandemic, and we either have that or we have I've got to go to work and I don't feel safe. Like
Right.
the ontological questions of right now are totally different, right?
That's right.
So I don't know that I could do that.
That's interesting. Oh, you just froze again. Oh, there,
Yeah.
you're back. You're back. Yeah, I mean, I'm still too close to having written this book, so I don't know how I would have done it differently. But to me, the weird thing is that a lot of times, and I want to know if this happens for you, I don't know how I feel about a book until it's out. And then once people start talking about it, I'm always surprised at what they say, because a lot of times I feel like, well, I wasn't aware of that until you told me. And now I guess maybe that's true. So I don't really know. I mean, the only thing that I know is that I'm not going to write a book with Coleman in it ever again. I feel like I got that, but I think you're right about with being in the pandemic. Now, my major questions and stuff that I'm writing now is, how do we feel safe? Like, how do you feel safe? Because There is no real answer to that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, my guess is that we're not going to have a, V-shaped recovery in which art suddenly goes back to addressing the questions that it was addressing last year. It's just not going to happen.
Right, right. But on the other hand, do you really want to read a book about the pandemic right now?
I mean, I don't necessarily want to read a book about it. Like, the interesting question, here's a question that we both could answer in interesting ways. What was your experience of sort of ideas and productivity immediately after 9/11?
Oh boy. My son was 5 years old when 9/11 hit, and he saw it from his kindergarten window. And Jeff and I saw it right, a few blocks away. We watched the towers fall. And I remember it was totally surreal. And I wasn't in a really happy period of my life then anyway, but if I'm remembering correctly, and I just didn't want to write. And I don't remember sitting back down and writing because the whole thing seemed so weird. And also there were these signs all over the place of people, who were missing, missing, missing. And Hoboken smelled really terrible. It was this weird metallic computer smell. And it sort of felt like nothing I could write would ever be as close to that. And the weird thing is that Jeff took photographs when we saw the towers fall, and we've never looked at them. We've never looked at them. We've never developed them. I never want to look at them. I never want to develop them. It was almost too close. And I will never write about 9/11 because it feels like it was too immediate and too close. The reason why, for me, the pandemic is different because we've been so blessed and so lucky in that we only know one person. Well, we know a bunch of people who had COVID, but they were able to survive and they were okay. Nobody I know personally has died, though certainly there are a lot of people dying. Only one of my friends was really, really sick for about 6 months, but she's getting better. My immediate family is okay. I think once that point happens, I'm going to feel a lot differently about it, and I'm not going to want to. For me, my feeling is like I don't want to write about it. I don't want to think about it. What about for you? What about for you after 9/11? You were in Brooklyn then, right?
I was in Brooklyn, and my first wife worked like 3 blocks from the towers downtown. And I was actually in Washington that day. I was working for the NEA on the grant panel that year.
Oh
And so I
no.
was like in a room with Nicholson Baker and Christina Garcia and David Guterson and some other people. We were all like sitting in the NEA, which is now Trump International Hotel.
Right, right.
Um, uh, and we got evacuated, but I couldn't get to my wife because the one thing you couldn't do was call from Washington to New York that day. Like,
Oh no.
not a thing that could happen. So she had to run. She ran across the Brooklyn Bridge. She saw the whole, probably not dissimilar to what you saw. She was right there. She saw the whole thing.
It's
But the reason to bring it up is that I think a huge novelistic consciousness change happened at that time. Like,
mhm.
how people thought about what the novel is and what the novel can address had to change. Like, you couldn't write like a, funny, withering, cynical comic novel in the year after 9/11.
Oh
Couldn't happen.
no, 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 no. You couldn't. Yeah, it's funny because the novel that I sold to Algonquin next, I can still write it because it still has some of those issues that have to do with the pandemic and being safe and what we owe people and that kind of stuff. But you're right, you couldn't write a comic novel about it. And plus, it's still happening.
Yeah.
It's still happening. We don't know what's going to happen. And especially to me, the great fear is if Trump gets reelected. And then I just feel like, well, we're all screwed then. we're all screwed. Like, where are we going to go? And apologies and not apologies to anybody out there who is voting for Trump, but I sort of feel like that's definitely the wrong thing to do. So I don't know. I mean, the thing about don't you find that when you're writing a book that everything that you're writing sort of changes anyway as you're writing it and with your feelings?
Say again, I missed the last bit.
When you're writing a book, and it takes like a year or 2 years, and you change over that year or 2 years. So
Yeah.
don't you find yourself going back and sort of changing the book and changing the story?
Yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's like so difficult. And to answer your question specifically, I don't think right now that I want to read 100 books about pandemic. But,
No.
but what I do think is inevitable is that the trauma of what everybody's going through, the national trauma,
Right. Will come through.
is going to be sort of sifted through novelistic consciousness. And in my case, I have lost one or two people, and my wife has got sort of long haul
Oh
post-viral syndrome.
no.
So I've sort of been dealing with it, and it's less that I want to sort of write a expose about post-viral syndrome, but it is the case that I feel like how we make art and literature is and will change over the course of these months, and that's a thing that means that we have to sort of sit back and adjust.
Right. You know what? As soon as you said post-viral, to me, that's much more interesting than reading a book about being in the pandemic, which feels much too close to me. But I'd be really interested to read, well, how are we all going to change? And what is the world going to be like, especially now that we know since it's happened once, it surely can happen again.
Yeah, or continue
Or
happening.
continue happening and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Um, it's it's a strange thing. It's a really strange thing. So now that we're both talking about the transcendence of our middle years, what do you think about like your writing career, like what you might be writing about in the next stage, and like say the last stage of your life? Do you think about that?
Did you ever read that guy, Richard Bausch? Did you ever read his
Yeah,
stories?
sure.
Yeah, he's a writer that when I worked in book publishing, we published one of his books, a really great book called Spirits. And the thing about Bausch in those days was that he was famous for writing well about older people. Like he had this intense compassion for sort of older subjectivities and so on.
Mhm.
And I really identify with that. I feel like giving space, to am I frozen?
No, you're unfrozen. You're fine.
Giving space to protagonists who are not young and beautiful and who have the kind of panoramic concerns of older people. That's so exciting to me. I'm really willing to dig in on that one. And I have been writing stories about that. And that's sort of in play for me, a book of stories about aging a little bit.
The thing is, I had a very difficult mother, and she gave me the greatest gift of all. She had a terrible marriage. She hated men. She hated all my boyfriends, all my sister's boyfriends. And when she was in her 90s, she couldn't live alone, so she had to go into assisted living, which she went kicking and screaming. When she was 93, she fell in love for the first time with this absolutely amazing man, Walter, who was smart and wonderful, and he adored her. They were together for 5 years. And the loveliest thing is that when Walter died very suddenly, my mom had dementia, and my sister and I agreed that we were never going to tell my mom that Walter had died. So for the last few years of my mom's life, she was still happy. She still thought Walter was visiting her every day. And I sort of wrote about that in my last book, Cruel Beautiful World. And the funny thing is that my mom's character is the character that everybody likes the best, even though she's not the main character, because it was just such an amazing thing that You know, there she is in her 90s. And I mean, they were staying over in each other's room too. It was a physical as well as spiritual relationship. And I find that really hopeful and interesting too.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I
Amen.
love it.
Amen on that score.
Oh yeah, me too, me too. And I feel like, and my mother was difficult and she changed totally with this guy, Walter. So if she can do it, anybody can do it. So we're about winding up. So I want to say I have to go into PR mode. The Long Accomplishment by Rick Moody is in paperback now. And trust me, it's fabulous. It's absolutely, completely fabulous, brilliant book. And this is my baby. And it's in hardback. And please buy it. And I will love you forever if you do. Oh, thank you, Rick. You got it right side up. And buy both our books, buy everybody's books. Please go to bookshop.org. What was the bookstore you wanted to call out, Rick?
Oh, Greenlight in Brooklyn has always been supportive of me. I love Greenlight. Jessica, if you're out there, thank you for everything. Good store.
Little City Books in my native Hoboken. It's also,
oh yeah, I did an
it's
event
also
there. I
great.
love that store.
You did? You have? Wow.
Yeah,
It's like they're actually doing. They actually opened another branch. It's amazing.
Yay.
They did amazing things. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming to A Mighty Blaze, and thank you for supporting both of us. And Rick, please stay on. And I guess we're going to be going off live now, hopefully.